my name is Lizzie, and this is Lizzie's Literary Life, and today I am taking you through my 2023 reading stats. You know I love stats. You know I love spreadsheets. This is so exciting. I've barely looked at these stats really. I set everything up to be automated at the beginning of the year, and I really haven't looked at it since. I know that I read 116 books, but really I don't know much else about what my stats are going to look like. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to look together. Actually, will I share my screen? No, I'm just going to put the graphs up on the screen because I think that's going to work better. But I will be looking at my spreadsheet, and you'll be looking at the graphs on my screen, and this is going to be very exciting. Okay, so currently I'm on my homepage, so I'm just going to click on my stats page. I read 116 books, which was a total of 41,515 pages. I know that this is less than I've read in previous years, but it still feels like a lot, because it still is a lot. That's an average of just over 350 pages per book, which is an average book length. Average audiobook length was 11.8 hours. My average rating was a 3.49, which is fine. I don't know. This is something that I've been thinking about because a lot of my friends and just a lot of people are like, I want to do quality over quantity next year. And really Ruby from Ruby Red is like, I want a 4.0 average rating. That's the goal. And I kind of am like, I don't know if I'm just not there yet, but I just love the act of reading. I don't care if I'm reading a bunch of stuff that's bad. Obviously, ideally, I read stuff that I like, and I'm going to try picking up things that I like. But I love reading. I love reading a lot of books, and I love spending a lot of time reading. So I don't have that, want for my rating, need for my rating to be higher by reading fewer books, if that makes sense. It took me an average of 8.7 days to finish each book, which I think is interesting. That feels longer than I would maybe guess. Maybe there's some really long ones that are pulling that average up. I read 113.7 pages per day on average. This is fun. A total of 501 hours spent reading this year. 501 hours, which is an average of an hour and 22 minutes per day, which is a lot. That's a lot. That's probably about what I would guess based on what I think I do spend, but it's still a lot. My pages per hour on average is just over 100. And actually, we'll go to my pages per hour graph for physical, audio, and ebook is, I think, interesting because you can see that the audiobooks that I read, I read much slower, I have a much slower pages per hour, and the physical books are the highest pages per hour, but this also goes kind of hand in hand with this graph that shows the average length of my different formats. Actually, this is really interesting to take these two graphs in tandem. So ebooks I read faster than physical books I read fastest. But I think that's because graphic novels I always read physically. And so the few graphic novels I did read pulled that average up. Audiobooks are slower, obviously, because there's someone talking to me, even though I do listen on 2 times speed usually. I do eyeball read faster than that. And then this yellow graph has my longest books on average are audio, and then ebook and physical are pretty even. So that's interesting. And then this is an embarrassing stat. Well, first off, a little under 50% of books were planned as TBR reads, which I think is about what I would expect. I'm about half a TBR reader and half a mood reader. Just over 30% of my books had LGBTQ plus rep. And then this is the one that's embarrassing. And I really would like to improve on this next year. Just under 15% of the books I read were by authors of color, which is really, I'm very not proud of that, but it is what it is. It's the publishing industry, but also it's me. So that's just something to be mindful of and keep an eye on for next year. And then we have my genre graph. Look at this. So I made it all the same colors as my book blanket. So it's all reds, oranges, and yellows. But our biggest sections are our biggest section actually is tied historical fiction and fantasy. I feel like I read more historical fiction this year than I did last year. And then mystery thriller is up there too. Contemporary romance, if we combine those together, it would be about the same as the big ones, but they're separate. And literary fiction, I put usually under contemporary unless it's historical. Then I put under historical. I don't have a section for literary fiction. But this is interesting. We have something of everything. My smallest section is poetry. I think I read two poetry collections this year, or poetry books this year. But yeah, I would say these are my favorite genres, the ones that I'm reading the most of: historical fiction, fantasy, mysteries, literary contemporaries. But also that's kind of most of the genres. So I don't know. I kind of read everything. Age group here I read mostly adult books at 83.6%, more middle grade than young adult in the rest of that, but still, I only read 7 young adult books this year, which I feel like that's been going down each year, which we'll actually see in a minute. This one's super interesting for me, I don't know, based on my previous reading, that we have almost even thirds, not quite, but close to even thirds, ebook, physical, and audio, and ebook is the smallest. I read a lot more physical books than I have in previous years. And I keep referencing previous years. I actually have graphs that compare to previous years, which are going to be super interesting, but we'll get to those in a second. My ratings, most common ratings are 3.5 and 4, which is definitely what I expect, followed by 3. But there's a solid number of 4.5s and 5s. There's more 4.5s and 5s than there are 2s and 2.5s. So that's good. That's very solid. Author gender, I read mostly books by women, which I am not upset about in the slightest. I do have a section for non-binary authors in here, but it's small because I think it was just only one. So it's not really showing up, but mostly books by women. Books read per month. I guess my biggest reading month of the year was March with 14 books, and my lowest was October with 6 books. That makes sense to me. I'm surprised it wasn't a little higher during the summer, but I guess summer was kind of average, and then we just had some peaks and troughs around there. Release years. Big peak in like 2021, 2022, which really just makes a lot of sense. And then it kind of tapers off. I don't read a ton of new releases, but I'm mostly reading books released in the past like 3 years, so that makes sense. 13.79% of the books I read this year were with other people, so in a book club or a buddy read. I only read 2 graphic novels. I don't know what percent that was. But 6.9% were rereads. I don't do a lot of rereads. But yeah, that's my stats for just this year. Now let's go to some 2022, 2021 comparisons. So first off, we have this books read and pages read. I read the most in 2021, less in 2022, though I guess 2022 I read longer books, because the pages are much closer than the books were. And then I read a lot less this year, but that's okay. Same with pages per day. That's pretty it's the same shape as total pages because it's just divided by 365. And then my average rating has also gone down the last 3 years. It was almost a 4-star, a 3.95 in 2021, and now we're down to a 3.49. So I think it's not that I'm reading worse books. I think it's that I'm being more discriminating and being more critical of the books that I'm reading. Here is those same numbers I just showed you. The from TBR, which has remained relatively consistent. LGBTQ has remained relatively consistent. And gosh, authors of color have gone down. So I definitely did a lot better on that in previous years. I don't know if it's maybe, and I don't want to be like explaining away my own like biases, but also I think it's possibly because in 2021 I was reading a lot less booktube recommendations, like a lot less of like what's popular. And I wonder if there's a trend. I mean, there's a bias on booktube and in publishing towards white authors, and I wonder if that's Like, if I'm reading more popular books lately, that's contributing to that. But also, I just haven't been paying attention to it this year, and that's on me. These are my months read from 2021 to 2023. The blue is always 2021, red is 2022, yellow is 2023 for all of these, at least so far. And yeah, it's interesting that like I do usually have a peak in the spring and then at the end of the year, sort of. Whereas like, that's interesting. Here are some rating stats. Now these 100% stacked charts, I'm about to show you a ton of them. Basically, it's like as a percentage of all the books I read. So like obviously I read more in 2021, so there would be more 5 stars, but this is as a percentage of all the books I've read, how many of them were 5 stars. In 2021, I didn't give half stars, or I didn't until most like part of the way through the year, I guess. So everything's bigger, but I did give more 5 stars in 2022 than I did previously, but everything else is pretty consistent, it looks like. So it's not a huge difference. This is rating, obviously, if you couldn't tell. My age breakdown, this one I find super interesting, that as here we have yellow is middle grade, red is young adult, blue is adult, from 2021 on the left to 2023 on the right. My young adult has gone way down. Middle grade has stayed about consistent, and adult has gone way up. And I think that makes a ton of sense for me. Like, I'm aging out of young adult. I'm not enjoying it as much, but I'm still enjoying middle grade. And I'm just reading more adult books. Format-wise, this one is also really interesting to me because in 2021, I read the vast majority of my books on audio. And then in the beginning of 2022, I got my Kindle. And so in 2022, I read most of my books on Kindle and not a lot of physical books because I was like moving and all sorts of things. And then in this year, I've gotten a lot more physical books from the library. And so I've used my Kindle less. So that's really interesting how that's changed. Gender breakdown is very consistent. I have always, or the last 3 years, read books primarily by female authors. And then my genre breakdown over time, another one of these crazy charts. But you can see that in 2021, I read barely any romance. That's at the top of the graph. And I started reading that in 2022. I did read a lot more historical fiction than I have previous years. Less fantasy this year than I did last year. But I guess less of everything because I read more historical fiction. A lot less contemporary. My contemporary has gone steadily down since 2021. I guess in 2021 I was reading quite a few maybe YA contemporaries, and that has just completely gone away. Yeah, I think that's it. I think that's all my graphs. Actually, there's one more thing I want to do. I want to do it real quick, maybe. I want to do my average ratings for different genres. So we're going to do historical fiction, fantasy, mystery, thriller, contemporary, and romance. Oh, this is so interesting. I'm just putting this together right now, and I gasped. Whoa. Okay, let me make a chart. Real quick. Okay, so here we have my ratings by genre for the biggest genres I've read. So highest at 3.8 is historical fiction, and lowest at 2.9 is mystery thriller. And then we have fantasy and romance pretty much on par at the 3.39 and 3.35, and contemporary a little higher with the 3.53. That's wild. I gasped when I saw that mystery thriller rating, but it's true. I filmed my worst books video, and a lot of the ones on there were mystery thrillers. I just am really picky about mystery thrillers, I guess. But wow, I do say historical fiction is my favorite genre, so that makes sense. I read most of it. It was my biggest genre piece of the pie, and it's also my highest rated genre. But that's super interesting. Okay, I'm glad I did this stat. We're going to end on this one. Wow. Yeah. I like books. And I like different books differently, but I enjoy the reading experience of all books. I just like reading books. And with that, comment down below any of these stats that surprised you or did not surprise you based on what you know about my reading. And I will like and subscribe because there's lots of fun content coming, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.